You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show, ideas for happy horsekeeping.
Any training can be done poorly and cause problems. It's not R+ that's causing the problem. It's the lack of understanding of how to properly apply the science. That's a quote from Shawna Karrasch, my guest today. In this episode, I'm joined by the OG of clicker training for horses to discuss the recent trend of horse trainers on social media with thousands of followers who scoff at positive reinforcement training, aka clicker training. It's very clear to me that these experts are missing at least one of three key elements to success with R+, and it's the missing element, or elements, that is the source of their trouble. If you struggle with clicker training, or if you've dabbled in it with poor results, this episode may change your perspective and help create a more cooperative horse. So listen in. This is episode 123 of the Stall and Stable Show, brought to you by American Stalls. American Stalls provides farm owners with hundreds of choices of premium quality stall components and accessories. From European stall fronts to paddock gates and custom doors and windows, everything they make is beautiful and durable. In a world full of unpredictability, having a home for your horse that is predictably safe and comfortable means having a home outfitted by American Stalls. To learn more, visit them at americanstalls.com. Welcome back, listeners. Today's Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. I'm your host, Helena Harris. The Stall and Stable Show is made possible by our terrific sponsors, American Stalls, Barn Pros, and by listeners like you. Barn Pros barns are the soul of their company. Their barns are built to be truly functional without sacrificing beauty. Whether a gable or a monitor style, you're sure to find the perfect structure for your lifestyle. Any of their structures can be used for equestrian, agricultural, livestock, or recreational purposes. I encourage you to go up to their website and explore their barns. You can find them online at barnpros.com. Welcome back, listeners. Before we dive into my conversation with Shawna Karrasch, I must give you an update about what's happening at Who Hollow. I'll make it quick, or as quick as I can make it. You know I tend to be a little verbose. I've been getting several emails asking about Clarabelle, the baby princess horse. She's been enjoying quite the vacation from work this year. The wound on her cannon bone has healed completely, and she's ready to start training again. In fact, she has been ready for a few months now. So while the leg is very sound, it is awful looking. It's just awful looking. But thousands of dollars in x-rays and ultrasounds tell us that all of her parts are healthy and strong, so we've got the green light to start working. The problem is that I've just not had the time to devote to both her and Susie. And since Sue has been going so well lately, I've been really focusing on her development so that I can find her a suitable person to lease her and have some fun together. I honestly, after turning that big corner with Tick and also finding better balance for me in the saddle, I found a nice local instructor who really understands rider biomechanics and with a couple of adjustments, a game changer. And so between training with Tick and making some adjustments to my own physicalness, my own physicality in the saddle, Susie and I are just having a blast. So having just a little too much fun. But Clarabelle is ready to get going again. So that means that on Susie's rest days, I can start groundwork with Clarabelle again. We will, of course, resume clicker training and incorporate leadership training where necessary. Brody has slimmed down for the summer and is enjoying life as a husband horse. He continues to be sound and comfortable, thank goodness. He's happy, we're happy. We just keep him going enough to keep that weight in a good place. Honestly, Brody's greatest challenge this summer is staying clean. My God, that boy likes to be dirty. He doesn't just like to get dirty, he likes to be dirty. We've been traveling to Who too about once a month in order to mow the yard and the pastures, meet with contractors and plumbers and all that fun stuff. I will admit, it's challenging to manage two properties that are so far apart. But that's a first world equestrian problem, if ever there was one. I am very, very, very excited to get down there in the winter. We're not exactly sure what our departure date is, but I'll keep you guys in the loop. Moving on. As many of you know, I have spent several years now studying and practicing positive reinforcement training with Shawna Karrasch in particular, and I've had life-changing success with it. Yeah, that's not a dramatization. It has been life-changing. My 3 horses are happy to cooperate with just about anything I ask of them, especially when I first teach them using a clicker. Now, I don't exclusively use clicker training or R+. I'm going to use those 2 terms interchangeably, but I don't exclusively use R+ in my relationship with Brody, Susie, and Clarabelle. But it does make up about 90% of my interaction with them. So in my experience with R+, there are 3 key elements to success. Number 1, thoroughly understanding the science. Number 2, developing one's observational skills to a ninja level. And number 3, combining the 2 as an art form. There are talented trainers, there are crap trainers, there are mediocre trainers. Just because, as a trainer, you've employed certain techniques with horses does not mean you will be good at it. Lots of people know how to dance. That doesn't make them great dancers, or even good ones. The same goes for horse trainers, because even among successful trainers, not all will be adept at R+, and certainly not all can move effectively between R+ and the other training quadrants. And I have a really cool graphic that I created last year that, for all intents and purposes, describes the 4 different quadrants: negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, negative punishment, and positive punishment. The trainers who can move between R+ and any of the other quadrants are rare. So to all professional trainers who are listening to this podcast right now, and you feel the need to discredit R+, I hope you'll consider that the problem may not be with R+ at all, but rather your implementation of it. You may be very good at what you do, but if you lack one of those 3 key elements I just mentioned, your success rate with R+ will be challenged. What those of us who use R+ kindly ask is that if you've not had much luck with it, please don't attempt to discredit the method. Doing so only fuels outdated mindsets that still rely on inhumane and often cruel training strategies. There is a place for different approaches to teaching horses. The truth is a pathless land. But let's start with the science first, the art second, and an open discussion thereafter. And that's what we're going to have with Shawna Karrasch today, an open discussion. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Shawna and Jesse. We're going to have a little different conversation today about positive reinforcement. We're not going to talk about how to do it or why to do it. We're going to talk about how people get it wrong and some of the misconceptions about positive reinforcement training. And there's been a lot of media, public relations, promotional stuff about some really important work on the equine brain. But there are some things that even professionals get wrong about positive reinforcement. One of the first things that I hear from respected trainers and professionals in the field is that positive reinforcement or clicker training or any training with food rewards makes a horse mouthy and aggressive. Let's start with that. Is that the truth? Right? Well, you're going to tell us whether it's the truth or not. And how do we counteract that potential behavior in a horse when we start positive reinforcement?
It can be.
Yeah, it can be the truth. I think the number one thing that's the most important about this is that positive reinforcement can be done poorly by anybody. It takes a fair share of skill to get it right, or persistence in wanting to get it sorted out and figure out how do you do this. So it's one thing understanding it from an academic side. A lot of people are really good with the academics. But to put it into practice is a very, very different skill. I think that done poorly, we can create a horse who is too excited, too focused on the food. This is the best part of his day. And now they're a kid going to Disneyland, and they're like, come on now. And if they're not getting clarity with how to succeed, if we're going in too big of a, we're trying to make too big of a steps in that direction, that they can, where they're like, I don't know how to get the right answer. I don't know how to earn the reinforcement. We can get into trouble with them. This is what Jesse and I are setting out there to do, is be sure that people get it right and don't get in these pieces. 30 years ago, when I first started this endeavor, I just left the marine mammals and moved to the horses. It was about getting people to understand the science so they were interested in it. But now what we're starting to do is now people are interested in it. They are getting it. There is success. It's a bigger buzz. It's exponentially growing, the understanding and the desire to get it right. And on top of that, the welfare challenges that we are faced with as a horse industry are now putting it in our face a little bit more. People are thinking more about the fact that they are sentient beings. They have emotions. So what do we do? So the first thing is trying to figure out how to get relaxation to be a part of it. Anything can be a distraction in the learning. So food being the most exciting part of most horses' day, it can be, this is the best. We have to teach them to relax and settle and focus and teach them to be learners. Just understanding neuroscience is not enough. And I'm also going to point out, neuroscience is changing on a regular basis now. I mean, it is what was yesterday there's new today. So to stay active in that and keeping up with it. But I think what neuroscience is also diving into more that hasn't been looked at as much is how do we help to maximize them as learners and the role that the emotions play in it.
The neuroscience of the equine brain is a biological process. What we're learning right now is the mechanical, biological, physical process of how certain stimuli have corresponding reactions in the brain. We get that. That's something we've never really known before. But there's a social element to learning, which is what you're talking about. We have to anthropomorphize a little bit in order to understand the horse as a student. And I talk about this a lot, where if you look at your horse as a child or a student athlete, how do you set up the classroom for them? How do you make them comfortable and provide relaxation so they can learn how to read, write, and do math and all that stuff? So something that you said early on when I first started studying your content was that food is a powerful reinforcer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we get into trouble. A lot of people say, I think I understand the concept of do the behavior, reward the behavior. But where the science of clicker training comes in is as a behavior shaper and reinforcer, not as a social gesture, which is the way I think a lot of people use it. It's like, good boy, job well done, here you go, thank you. And that's not how behavior reinforcers work. So take us through that.
Okay, and I think this is great because when I did my first book 20 some years ago, but when I first did it, I was really thinking about, I was coming from the marine mammal world. And while emotions were part of the equation, because people forget they got all their food each and every day, regardless of what they did or didn't do, all their social interactions, so why'd they do it? And so we kind of understood that we're making it fun and doing this, but we didn't talk about it as much. But once I got to the horse world, I picture it now like an iceberg. So there is this top of the iceberg that we see. This is operant conditioning. This is teaching them to do the stuff. This is getting them on the trailer. And then underneath the water is this giant piece of the iceberg that I never even looked at. So when I started working with BZ Madden, I would look under the water and be like, it's so big, I don't even know what I'm seeing. And now that has only come into more and more clarity. And I think that is thinking of the operant conditioning is teaching them how to do the stuff. This is a training we all think about. But in addition to that, there's also the classic conditioning, which is going on behind the scenes all of the time. And so this is the really big picture. We're trying to create horses who emotionally want to engage. And this has very deep tendrils. So if we just pull it out and say, this is how we teach this, we're missing what I think is the most important part of the whole kit and caboodle. The most important part is how we change our relationships. We change their relationship with learning. We change their relationship with us, teach them to be problem solvers. We can change their perspective of the world. The more we practice with traditional training, which is negative reinforcement, we apply pressure, we take it away. You know what we're helping them to do each and every day? We're helping them to perfect the art of avoidance and escape. So they see us and they think, oh, I don't want to get a halter. I don't want to do it. We just get them better at that. And whether people like it or not, using negative reinforcement, and I always tell people, it's not saying it's a bad thing. Negative reinforcement means a subtraction of something that they want to go away. It has to be aversive. Otherwise, the removal of it would not work. If they didn't care if the leg was on or off, we take the leg off, they wouldn't go forward, they wouldn't care. So there's an aversive quality. But when we are constantly the bringer of aversiveness, pretty soon they're getting better escape and avoidance. When we start shifting it to something valuable and powerful, and that we know has been related to endorphins and dopamines and oxytocin, food is very strongly related to oxytocin. I think then we start creating more bonding and more hormones where they start to see us and think, I like you, I want to do this. But without the awareness of how do we help the calmness come into the picture so that instead of going, oh my gosh, it's the target, it's the clickers, where they've got themselves overloaded with these good things. We need them to go, okay, here it comes. And so there's a skill set to working through that. They're excited and happy to see us, but we need to temper that excitement so that they can slow down and think through it. So if we keep it very novel, the positive reinforcement, and it happens once a day and it gets in and you have to do something in order to earn the reinforcement, then you have a lot of activity. The brain lights up and gets excited as opposed to like, hey, it's my favorite part of the day. What are we going to do today? So I think there's so many nuances in it that, I'm learning more all the time, but I think that it is a really important component that is not grasped by even a lot of positive reinforcement people.
You said skill set. You used the word skill set. And I don't think that people who are trying positive reinforcement for the first time understand that they have to develop a skill set. This isn't something you can dabble in because it is so powerful. And when they dabble, we all invariably make mistakes when we're learning to use something new, right? And you dabble, but the mistakes, because it's a novel tool or exercise, if you're only doing it once a day, it's hard to get past your horse's excitement level. And so you're like, well, wait a minute, this is just, I'm getting a mouthy horse here. For me, when I started doing it once a day, I ran into the same problems. But then I went to one of your clinics and I was working with an unknown horse who was very aggressive with his mouth. And you gave me some tips and it worked. It was great. And we very quickly took that horse from mouthy to relaxed. And that's part of the skill set that the average or the new clicker trainer, DIY or professional they might not get that piece of information and get stuck. So when I started working with my horses, especially my thoroughbreds, they were very excited. And I thought, oh crap, this is too much for me. But then when I started doing it twice a day or 3 times a day, it was less novel, like you said. And they began to make the connection in their brain with the exercise. Okay, this food is my reward. I'm going to get lots of it. And all I need to do to get the food or to get the reward is to figure out this puzzle. And like you always say, oh, I like to do puzzles. Horses love to do puzzles, especially thoroughbreds. Yes. So I think having a little more respect for the fact that this is a very powerful scientific technique is something that people new to positive reinforcement need to understand.
Yes. And I think those are great points. And I love that you have your own experience with it. So you went through it like many, many people do. I think what's misleading, it's kind of simple on one way. Any behavior increases or maintains in frequencies, something's reinforcing it. The end. That's all there is to it. So if you're getting more mouthy, then keeping their heads to themselves isn't reinforced enough. That's all there is to it. That's how behavior works. But I think that simplicity in one way seems very, I just want more getting on the trailer. But they don't realize that the horse that shows up for their trailer loading sessions is crazy, because they're so excited. They're hardwired for food. They want it. They need it. From the moment they're born, they're struggling to get food and water. So that desire for food, that need for food, makes it the strongest reinforcer out there, the strongest. So now we have this really powerful thing in our hands. What do we do with it? And how do we turn that into the right thing? So I think if we start to recognize how powerful it is, but you also hit it on the head, when we get stingy with it, this is a 1,200-pound animal. And then we give them a little tiny handful of food. I mean, that's a handful of food I would gobble down. So there's tools and mechanisms we can do to help create that softness and that relaxation. But I think it's a really common thing for people new to positive reinforcement. So they go and they say, okay, I'm going to do this. This is great. And then I'm always saying, relaxation, relaxation. And all we can do is look at the overt signs of relaxation. We don't know what they're thinking. So we look for the softening of the eyes, the softening of the lips, the nose, the head carriage, the tail, the overall demeanor. And so you get people really good about that. And then they go, well, we've got that worked out, and they shelve it. And then they start doing stuff. And then pretty soon the horse is all lit up again, thinking the way I get the food is by doing the stuff, which creates more activity. We want to do stuff. Doing stuff's important too. But as we want to do the stuff, we also need to know that there is some self-regulation with those emotions, that they can go, oh, we're doing the stuff. And we start to go, okay, you seem like a lot right now. So that as we feel like we have too much, we have tools in place that we can slow it back down and say, okay, let's relax again. Take a deep breath and we can start again. But keeping that balance between doing stuff and not doing stuff is a human construct. And professionals all over the place. I have watched academics that are really good teachers of positive reinforcement. Like I send people to them all the time. But then you watch sessions and you're like, oh, ruh-roh. Maybe it's okay with one animal, but not with something, this big. And so you have to recognize that sometimes they're so busy in their textbooks and classrooms that the practical application does not even out that picture. So people just get it wrong. Look at the studies on applied learning theory, on the way animals learn, and the results of, consequences and what consequences of undesired things. Optimal learning is utilizing things that they value, but we need a certain awareness with it where we can slow it down and bring the horse back to the slow, methodical problem solver. The best point for me, when I really feel like the problem solver is in a good place, is when you go, let's try this. And you can see him going, this? And
you can see them thinking.
Yes.
And that's cumulative. When they start to think about something and then you reinforce their effort, there's a real learning that happens. Then there's something in them that says, when I think, I achieve, I get rewarded. It might not be clear to everybody, but as the trainer, there's something in you that has to be developed as well. It's an observational skill set that you have to be aware of when your horse is thinking, when he's learning, and when he might need a minute. What is his threshold for learning? Because even with clicker training, we can push them over their threshold. It looks a little bit different than when you're using negative reinforcement, but the threshold is still there. All of this to say is that positive reinforcement is as nuanced as all other types of horse training. And while the science is simple, the context is not. And this is what I think professionals get wrong. When I see somebody make a statement about positive reinforcement and how it turns horses into monsters, I go, well, they just haven't used it enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because through using it regularly, you come to understand the context, the different value food rewards that you use. One day you can use a high value food reward, and the next day you got to turn that down a little bit. Or depending on the task you're trying to teach, sometimes I'm looking for something higher value than I have around the house, and other times a handful of green grass is okay for what we're doing. But that's one of those nuances that you wouldn't know unless you actually spent a lot of time working with the clicker.
Yeah, we're learning as they're learning. So as we're trying to figure out, the horse gives us the feedback and the information immediately. Okay, I got too much horse right now. I gotta dial this down. What do I do? And again, then I focus on what I want to see more of. I want to see more calm. Well, how do I get calm? Do I need to step out of the paddock for a minute or outside the stall and look for calm? Do I need to go back to an old familiar exercise? Do I need to go back to that default position? They give us information, but we got to be trying the one step at a time, just like the horse. When we slow down and go, okay, that didn't get me what I wanted. Well, what? And again, we focus on what we do want. Then we have to also think, well, let's try it a little bit different. And people think that because I've done clinics for 30 years that I have all the answers. I don't.
Oh, come on, Shawna. We need you to have all the answers, please.
I think with the traditional horse world, people tend to think big, giant step. And so you should be doing a half pass. And you're like, well, maybe just the shift to the inside whatever, that shift over was enough for today. Or maybe that's the point we're going to click and go that piece, and we're going to put on those building blocks and bring clarity all throughout. One of the things that is a huge thing is clarity. So lack of clarity tends to bring frustration, and frustration may lead to aggression. So if you've got aggressive feeling, you've got frustration, it probably has a root in a lack of clarity.
My signal to step back, the ask, is when my horse gets frustrated or she doesn't comply or looks confused. The first thing I say to myself now is, maybe the ask is too big. Can I break this up into a smaller piece? And it's a humbling moment. You're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe walking onto the trailer is too much today. Maybe just looking at it. And I think that problem is ubiquitous in the horse world. No matter what kind of training you believe in, a lot of us ask too much of the horse in each session. And so taking a step back and breaking it down into the smaller piece is very important. What I've experienced personally is that when I do break it down into the tiniest, seemingly ridiculously small steps, the clarity provides a very quick accumulation to the much bigger ask. We get a lot closer. Take me through that. Is that something that you see? We go too far, too fast?
Yes. So, Jesse, you had something to add there.
Well, I was just going to say, having taught for trained horses for more than 20 years professionally, it's such a different animal. It's so hard to explain it, why you think in 1 second with positive reinforcement, you're like, when I first started it, I was like, this feels hectic. And with traditional training, you're just not taught to slow it down and take those steps. And for me, it was this huge awakening. And also on top of that was the relationship that we were developing with the horses. It's just something that you can't explain until you're doing it. And I have no idea why in traditional training we are not taught to slow down, look at the whole picture, look at the emotional state. And it's such a game changer. I can't even describe it.
And I think that in traditional training, we do think, and it's actually been cloistered with this disrespect concept. They're not doing it. They're not respecting you. You got to show them who's the boss, as opposed to saying, I think it's just really confusion. Horses are a very peaceable society. Yeah. They work together. Their existence is reliant on a peaceful existence, cooperative existence. So that is their nature. We put them into situations that are man-made, but they're not out there plotting against us. They're not out there trying to do things wrong. But I think that's where people are like, well, you got to make them do it. And I think when we break it down to the small steps, we bring so much clarity, and it's going on all the time. So as we start down this path and we start to go, ooh, this is a new exciting thing. If we get that frustration and get it sorted out very quickly, go, I see his head went up an inch, but it's enough for me to go, that's not like you. Maybe tension is starting to creep in here. In the traditional horse world, people haven't been taught to recognize that their chin got pointy all of a sudden, that their nostrils are flared. All of a sudden you see that and you go, okay, there's tension here. It doesn't look bigger than that. But if we can get that, it is very loud communication within them, for them saying, I'm struggling right now and I'm trying to do it right. But as we get them slowed down and thinking about the pieces, and we can slow down, because think about it. None of our horses asked to be here. We chose this for them. And so it's up to us to make it clear. And in the long run, you have a horse who problem solves on their own. But in the very beginning, it can be downright scary not to know the answer. Here's an example even. I have taught Henley, who has just turned 4 and doing under saddle stuff, but as a yearling, taught her to come line up at the mounting block. So I could run from anywhere and she with loose at Liberty, and she'd come line up and adjust until I told her it was good. It's her favorite behavior. Then when I got on her for the first time, we had the most calm, settled horse there could be. So people think I want to teach my horse to do that because it will result in that. So they want to do the behavior thinking this is going to result in that calm demeanor. But really, it was 2 years of work together that has made it where whatever I bring to the table, she's like, good, okay, fine, no worry. She's not focusing on escape and avoidance. Now she's engaged and there, and her little safe humans right up there on top of her, nothing to worry about up there. And because relaxation has been a big part of it, she's just like, yeah, okay, you're up there, no big deal. So people look at it and think, if I do this, I'll get this. But really, it is all the underneath stuff that is happening. It is creating neural pathways that are strong and see this as a joy and a pleasure. This is a concept in the psychology world of the trust bank, where we're putting deposits in the trust bank, putting deposits when the time comes and we got to take those withdrawals, because we do. We're like, yeah, I taught you about taking stuff in your mouth and now it's warmer. now the vet's coming and is going to stitch up a wound or whatever.
I have a hard time with the betrayal component, like here comes the dewormer. I'm sorry.
The more we do and put in there, the stronger our relationship and the deeper the neural pathways of the good things. And it really does change the horse's perspective. Because think about it, horses tend to be what's called neophobic. And again, I think our training adds to it. We teach them we're all about aversives, us humans. It's how we train you. Even though we feed you and do other things, it's not been a component of the relationship building. And it doesn't mean all horses with negative reinforcement are in a bad place. They're not. But I think we do teach them to get better at that avoidance and escapism. But as we start doing the positive reinforcement, we start getting a horse goes, hey, you're here. I feel great about it. And we start to have them start to look at new things instead of going, what's that? Because horses tend to be neophobic. It's stranger danger. Do I flee or freeze? What am I going to do? But as we start using positive reinforcement, you notice over and over, horses get more and more curious, more bold. So as opposed to thinking stranger danger, they start thinking, I'm curious, even if they're a little startled, and then they explore it, and then they're like, okay, I'm good. And they've kind of reinforced themselves intrinsically in that way because they realize, oh, it was just a rock.
And we do that by being trustworthy. So using positive reinforcement creates a trustworthy learning environment, and then the horse can feel safe, moving closer to their own threshold. So they know where their threshold is, but they feel safe with us through this process. So the threshold gets further and further away, right? They can experience more things within their comfort zone and then even walk up to the point where their comfort zone ends because they trust their relationship with us. They trust this process because it has not been negative. I want to switch over to the human side of this problem. This problem being not enough people respect the power of positive reinforcement. Unfortunately, misinformation spreads probably faster than accurate information, especially on social media. And if you are already a horse professional and you have a brand and you have a following and you have a misunderstanding of positive reinforcement, that can really turn us backwards in time. Let's talk about the psychology of the professional horse trainer who poo-poos positive reinforcement. My theory, and you can weigh in on this yourselves, is that there's a certain amount of expertise authority and maybe a dash of ego that comes with being a horse professional. You are supposed to be the expert, whether you've got a barn with 10 clients in it or 100. It's very difficult for the horse professional or the expert today to go back to being a beginner at anything. And so I find that their minds tend to be more closed about this method, not because they think it doesn't work, but because the risk to their business is too great for them to be a novice at something.
I totally agree with that. Here, anybody can hang a shingle and say, I'm a horse trainer. And when we talk about some of the disciplines that are the higher disciplines, there can be a fair share of cutthroat, taking clients from others. There is a fair share of competitiveness. So I think that is part of it. So I think it can be quite threatening for people that this new thing is coming along. And perhaps, so even if they dabble in something, if they're not going to find out more about it, they may just see it as a means to an end. I got to fix this problem, but not understand what they're really changing. So I think there's a fair share of cognitive dissonance also involved. So now if I accept that, then that means what I've been doing isn't the best. So now what do I do? So I think there can be guilt involved with it. I think that there can be threat involved in it. It's a general discomfort. Last year we did an expo in Harrisburg, and I remember 4 times we heard people on microphones saying clicker training or using food is bad. These were trainers. Now, years and years ago, when I started, Pat Pirelli was new, Clinton Anderson was new, Monty Roberts was new. We were all out there doing John Lyons. We were doing expos 25 years ago. Nobody, and we were at every single one. We're all friends. Nobody put down what I did because there was no threat. But now for people to be standing up and saying it doesn't work, it tells me it's becoming more successful. It's becoming more of a threat to people in their business. There's somebody that's kind of dabbling, Western kind of guy-ish, and dabbling in the positive reinforcement, and used to contact me a little bit, and now is not. And people keep telling him, you should have her on your podcast. And I haven't heard a word. I think it's because the perception is that may take away from what they do. So I think that it is scary to do. It's hard to do. But I also think the horse world has been sold a lot of snake oil. Things that have been pseudoscience, words used. So one of the things I used to tell people, I'd say, turn off the sound and watch the video. What do you think?
There is confusion about how to mix in positive reinforcement with what you already know. I think some people feel like, well, there's some negative connotations with traditional training. Does that mean I have to switch completely over to positive reinforcement? How much time is that going to take? How much is it going to cost me? Am I going to be able to do this by myself? So it becomes intimidating and overwhelming to think I have to switch my entire training program over to this new thing. Even though in my heart, I might feel like it's better for my horses, I simply don't have the means to do that. And that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in that you talk about. I will say that I struggled with that. How do I do this thing that I love, that my horses love? And sometimes it doesn't work. I'm not, and I've said this in the last 2 episodes that I did, which is I'm not an all or nothing type of person. And I worked with Tick again this past weekend, and I know that you have worked with him, and he has wholeheartedly embraced positive reinforcement. He has not completely abandoned negative reinforcement, however. For somebody who has a balanced perspective on training like he does, and I know that he's in our camp,
right.
He gave me a nice ratio, which gave me the freedom to figure out how to incorporate both elements into my training program. 90% of what we're trying to teach horses is positive reinforcement, is friendship, is trust, is relationship. And that there may be a 10% element where you have to use natural horsemanship or negative reinforcement for leadership. If you do that, you need to look to the horse's social interactions. You need to look for a truly natural interaction between horses, and you want to replicate that kind of leadership. What that gave me was permission to really go back to my positive reinforcement, but I didn't have to abandon all my other tools and go complete. You know what I'm saying? It took the intimidation and overwhelming factor away from it.
I think this is a great discussion because it is, let's be honest, some of those positive reinforcement groups are not so positive reinforcement with people.
Exactly.
They'll be rather punitive if they see somebody mixing a little of this and a little of that. But this is what I try to remind people. Very few people, nobody really 30 years ago knew this. Do you think that people just went, okay, BZ Madden said, okay, I'm going to forget everything I know. Instead of going to the Olympics, I'm just going to go do this. No, this is the journey. The journey starts with you and your crossover horse thinking, I'm going to try a little leg lifting, and then I'm going to try a little of this, or maybe it's that he won't go forward underside or whatever it is. So I think the more you learn, the better you get at being able to go, I think this piece is a little more sensitive and I want to unpack this and only use positive reinforcement, come in this side door and train it back to the same cues, but not as pressure release, but using targets or whatever tools. So I think there's sometimes we do that. There's certain horses, I think I wouldn't use traditional training on them. They've been kind of clobbered over the head with it, where it's become abusive in their mindset. And then I also like to point out, like Minty I got from John and BZ Madden, and everything was positive reinforcement. You could come up to Minty, and in fact, one time there's a gal I was working with who was doing marketing with us. And this was a long time ago. This was back when I was with Vinton, long ago. And she wanted to ride Minty. Well, Minty is a thoroughbred. He's super sensitive, jumper, and very responsive, positive reinforcement, loves everything, is doing great. And she got on him, and she had her dog with her, and she was from Texas and did a lot of Western stuff. She started riding him like some cutting horse. I was horrified because it was big. It was things he didn't know. And she's kind of mad at her dog. So you could see that her frustration was coming out in the riding. And I was horrified. But you know what? I looked at Minty, and Minty just like, oh, problem to be solved. He didn't take this as a big offense because his overall perspective and outlook at the world was it's just a problem to be solved. It's all good. So as you had to go to those places, he didn't take offense. Now, if it carried on, would he get to a point of frustration? Yes. It was over very quickly. But at that moment in time, to watch him just be resilient and think no big deal and just carry on without having adrenaline spiking. We didn't have him now in fight or flight and worry. We all know fight or flight is not ideal state for learning. When we work with traditional training with negative reinforcement, we're working out of the fight or flight part of the brain. And I think, kind of as you've done, the more you learn, the more you want to go because you get more solutions. So the more you start delving into the positive reinforcement, thinking, how else could I do this? So I think it becomes another tool in our toolbox. And pretty soon it becomes our primary tool in our toolbox. But in the beginning, you need the permission to dabble.
And I think if you are a DIY trainer listening right now, or you're a professional, or you're a barn owner, I know that it's hard to sit down and find educational material when you're busy trying to keep your business alive. Keep horses in work, keep clients happy, pay your bills. But I think the most important part about making positive reinforcement work for you and your horses and your clients is to get yourself some more education. However you can process it, whether it's audio, whether it's sitting down to a book, whether it's videos. I'll admit, I have a very hard time finding an hour to sit down and do the coursework. It's like, okay, I have to schedule that for myself, but it's important. It's like any other professional skill set. You have to invest in your professional development to incorporate this part into your training. And you don't have to do it all at once.
Yes. And I think some horses permit more dabbling than others.
Yes.
I think there's certain horses that let you get away with it. And there's certain people out there that have worked with two horses and they're hanging their shingle. It's click or treat. You're like, well, there's a lot more to it. But it's been so easy with them and their horse that they don't quite realize that there's got to be some, zigging and zagging, ying and hawing to figure out what the pieces are. So some horses do permit that more. But by and large, the more you understand about how your horse learns and what motivates them, the better you're going to be. So the more you learn about applied learning theory, which sounds like this big technical term, but really it is understanding the neuroscience with the applied learning theory. So it's psychology and neuroscience coming together to say, this is how the brain works. But in the real world, this is what we've got. So this is how we are going to shape behavior and change behavior. Operant conditioning to me deals a lot with the teaching the stuff, but the neuroscience a lot of times and the classic conditioning is coming up behind it to solidify the relationship. Out of 40 years now, I've never stopped feeling like this isn't some kind of offshoot of a maternal relationship, that we have a certain amount of safety, stories about the target, and the target can bring them from over threshold to under threshold. And you're like, what is that about? This is the neuroscience. This is the classic conditioning, the pieces behind it that can create that sense of safety and exploration and curiosity. And this is what's hard to get the regular trainer to see because of all the snake oil they've been sold over the years, or all these pseudoscience that gets put out there. When somebody starts down the path of positive reinforcement, I get super excited for them. And I will almost keep it to myself because I'm like, whatever I say is going to fall flat compared to what they're going to experience if they really dive in.
I will underscore that 100 times over. You can hear it, you can read it, but until you experience it, that's when you feel the full power of it. And then I want to wrap with one last thing. There is a culture, especially in the United States, I call it the badass culture. And the more badass you are, the more credit you have, street cred.
Yeah.
And so controlling, micromanaging, and dominating horses has been the norm. They have been viewed from the beginning as creatures to be controlled and subdued. And that mindset persists. And it's what, that's that insecurity that stands in the way of positive reinforcement. But if you think about, again, I'm anthropomorphizing, but in the best way that I can, as of horses as children or students who need to learn and need to develop self-confidence and adventure skills, you first have to create a safe and trusting environment for them. And that's the maternal environment that you're talking about. They have to feel like there's a place of safety before they can go and flex their wings of independence, right? In problem solving. So that really resonates with me. If you were to, you're talking directly to people right now who might be resisting positive reinforcement. And these are professional trainers. The backyard DIY trainer, we run into problems all the time. So we're constantly seeking new ways to solve our problems. But that's not so much with the competitive world, right? You've made inroads into our market, but it's the competitive world, the show hunters, the jumpers, the eventers, the Western pleasure riders, the Olympians. These are the people who are loath to change or incorporate new things. What do you say to them to help open their minds?
I'm talking. I'm that person. Even with Shawna Karrasch in my house, I was still resisting it. Like I still was wanting to go back to it a little bit because I've trained a few hundred horses from like starting them under saddle. So you get very ingrained in the way that you do things. And we were always really gentle with them. But the difference between what we were doing and their perception of us, you talk about when you come to the barn and all of a sudden we're associated with endorphins and dopamine, think of the converse of that. We're associated with maybe negative things. And I realized I don't want to be associated with any horse in a negative light. So it's been a huge, Sean's going to have stuff to add to that, but that's kind of my little take on it from coming from that background.
With Jessie, I still want to give her permission to do things whatever she wants to do. I'm not barreling down her throat to do anything. I just let her discover it and figure it out. And I'm pretty easy with all that. I worked with Olympic show jumpers, Olympic dressage, world champion drivers. Even I remember one Olympic medalist dressage saying, I thought I had a good relationship before, but it's even better. A little extra light comes on now and we're doing things. But this is what I found. The highest level, we're like, we're good. We've made it. We've done it. We're rocking it. But I felt like it was the middle of the road trainers that really struggled. So it's just trying to say, the more you know about behavior, period, the stronger you're going to be. And then you can make your choices. But there's so much that is unknown to the horse world about behavior because of all this pseudoscience that's been out there. Well, now finally we're getting really accurate science out there. And let's admit, in the beginning, what is it? It's problem solving. They're like, okay, I have a horse who won't go forward under saddle or is stopping at jumps. I'll do whatever crazy thing you have, lady.
But how I got into it too. I had an issue that I was trying to solve.
And so you take it and you say, okay. So this is kind of their first endeavor. But I know then the onus is on teaching them as much as I can within this process and saying, you're going to be part of the training. I'm not here to come in and fix it like a car.
What I would add, and to wrap this up because we're running out of time, what I would add is that you have to be able to articulate the problem that you are experiencing with your horse. Your problem could be we're not competitive enough. We keep ending up with a red ribbon. We want the blue. Okay, yeah. Well, what's stopping you? You have to be able to identify and articulate the specific problem. And then when you're stuck, reach out to Shawna or Jesse or me. We can point you in the right direction. If you can package up your problem, then there is a clicker training solution for it. I promise you. And yes. If you don't know what that solution is, there are people like us who can point you in the right direction.
One thing I would add to this, that when you said about the professionals, remember when I first started, well, not remember, but I've told you about first started working with John and Beasy. Mm-hmm. All I did was 3 5-minute sessions a day of the clicker, 3 5-minute sessions a day of the target for the next 3 days, never interacted with them during riding. And yet at the end of the week, Beasy said every single one of the horses you were working is remarkably better in the arena. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. We can change the performance in the ring by not actually directly even addressing the performance of the ring. It just shows you that stuff is going on more than we know.
That is the perfect way to wrap this conversation. Thank you. Thank you. We are trying to convert the masses. So listeners, I will put links up in this week's show notes in this episode, and you can get to all of the resources that Shawna and Jesse have developed. And they have done so very thoughtfully for all different types of learners and professionals and dabblers. You don't have to worry about where to find them. Just go to stallandstable.com and I will link you right over to all things Shawna Karrasch. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Shawna. It's hard to encapsulate so much of the nuances of R+ clicker training in one conversation, but I hope this will at least open your mind if you have been a little averse to it. And if you have questions, feel free to email me. If there's something I can't help you with, I'll send you to Shawna and Jesse or an R+ trainer in your area. Many thanks to this week's sponsors, American Stalls, Barn Pros, and listeners like you. If you enjoy the Stall and Stable Show, I hope you'll go up to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. If there's something you think needs improvement, send me an email. You can reach me at helena@stallandstable.com. And that's going to be a wrap for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.